The San Diego morning broke with the kind of light that made everything look like a promise, golden rays spilling over the Coronado Bridge, catching the surface of the bay in 1,000 tiny mirrors. Aurora Kelly stood at her kitchen window, coffee cup warming her palms, watching a heron pick its way along the rocky shore behind her cottage. She'd lived in this same neighborhood for 43 years, raised 2 children here, buried a husband, and learned every rhythm of the tide like it was her own heartbeat. The knock came at 7:47 a.m. She remembered the time because she just glanced at the clock shaped like a sunflower, a gift from her daughter Maya, wondering if she had enough time to water the tomatoes before her shift at the Mercy Hospital cafeteria. Aurora had worked there for 22 years, knew every doctor's coffee order, every nurse's birthday, every janitor's story. She was the kind of woman people confided in without knowing why, her presence like a warm kitchen in winter. When she opened the door, there were 4 of them. 2 uniformed officers, a woman in a gray pantsuit with a detective's badge clipped to her belt, and a younger man holding a folder thick with papers. The detective spoke first. "Aurora Kelly?" "Yes." Aurora's voice carried the faint lilt of her childhood in Louisiana, softened by decades but never quite gone. "Can I help you?" "I'm Detective Sarah Chin. This is Detective Marcus Webb, Officer Rodriguez, and Officer Patterson. We need you to come with us to answer some questions about an incident that occurred in 2002. The coffee cup slipped from Aurora's hand. It shattered on the tile entryway, brown liquid spreading like a stain across the white grout she'd scrubbed just yesterday. Her neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, was watering her roses across the fence. She looked up at the sound, saw the uniforms, and her watering can went still. 2002? Aurora's mind raced backward through 23 years. "I don't understand. What incident?" "Ma'am, we'd prefer to discuss this at the station." Detective Chen's voice was professional, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath. "You have the right to remain silent." "Wait, are you arresting me?" The words felt absurd in her mouth. Aurora Kelly, who'd never gotten so much as a speeding ticket, who volunteered at the food bank every Saturday, who still brought homemade soup to sick neighbors. "We're taking you in for questioning regarding the death of Brandon Castellano." Detective Webb stepped forward, and Aurora saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. Not hostility, worse, certainty. "You're a person of interest in a cold case investigation that's been reopened. Brandon Castellano." The name hit her like a physical blow. She remembered that summer. God, how could she forget? It had been the summer of smoke and sirens. The summer when a 17-year-old boy had been found dead behind the Paradise Point Resort, and the whole community had held its breath. She'd served coffee to the detectives working that case, had seen the missing person flyers stapled to every telephone pole, had watched the news coverage showing Brandon's mother sobbing at a press conference. I never. Aurora's hands were shaking. "I served him breakfast once, maybe twice. He came into the cafeteria. But I didn't." "Ma'am, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Chun continued the Miranda warning as Webb gently took Aurora's elbow. "Do you understand these rights as I've explained them?" Mrs. Kowalski was openly staring now. Down the street, Roger Chun, no relation to the detective, had stopped mowing his lawn. Aurora could see curtains twitching in windows up and down the block. The morning light that had looked like a promise now felt like an interrogation lamp. "I need to call my daughter," Aurora said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, thin and distant. "You can make a call from the station," Detective Chin said. They let her grab her purse. She fumbled with the lock on her door, her fingers clumsy with shock. As they walked her to the unmarked sedan, Aurora caught sight of her reflection in Mrs. Kowalski's living room window. A 65-year-old black woman in a floral house dress and slippers, flanked by police officers, being led away from the only home she'd known for 4 decades. The heron she'd been watching had flown away. In the car, Aurora tried to organize her thoughts, but they scattered like startled birds. Brandon Castellano. She remembered him. A skinny white kid with freckles and a skateboard. Always polite. Always saying, "Yes, ma'am," and "Thank you, ma'am." when she served him scrambled eggs and toast. He'd come to the hospital cafeteria maybe 3 or 4 times that summer, always alone, always seeming a little lost. And then he'd vanished. And then they'd found his body. The news had said overdose, possible foul play, investigation ongoing. But as weeks turned to months and months turned to years, the story had faded. Brandon Castellano became another cold case, another unsolved tragedy, another family that would never get closure. Until now, apparently. The police station was a gray building that Aurora had driven past 1,000 times without really seeing. Inside, it smelled like industrial cleaner and bad coffee. They put her in an interview room. Pale green walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, a mirror that she knew was one-way glass from every crime show she'd ever watched with her late husband. Detective Chun offered her water. Aurora's throat was dry, but she shook her head. "Am I under arrest?" she asked again. "Not at this time," Chun said, settling into the chair across from her. Detective Webb stood by the door. "But we have evidence that places you at the scene of Brandon Castellano's death. We have reason to believe you were involved." "That's impossible." Aurora's voice was firmer now. Fear was giving way to something else, not anger, but a kind of desperate clarity. "I didn't even know where he died until I saw it on the news. I'd never been to Paradise Point. I worked at the hospital, I went home, I took care of my kids. That was my life." Chun opened the folder that Webb had been carrying. She slid a photograph across the table. It showed a necklace, a simple silver chain with a small pendant shaped like a bird in flight. Aurora recognized it immediately. "This was found with Brandon's body," Chun said. "It was logged into evidence in 2002. 6 months ago, advances in DNA testing allowed us to extract genetic material from skin cells on the clasp. The DNA matches yours, Mrs. Kelly. Your DNA from a medical database when you had surgery in 2019. Aurora stared at the necklace. Her grandmother had given it to her when she was 16, told her it represented freedom and hope. She'd worn it every day for years. And then, "I lost that," she whispered. "Summer of 2002. I thought maybe it fell off at work. I looked everywhere." "So you admit this is your necklace?" Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. "Yes, but I didn't hurt anyone. I don't know how it got there." Chun and Webb exchanged a glance. Webb spoke for the first time, his voice deeper than Chen's, more skeptical. "Mrs. Kelly, we've been building this case for months. We have witness statements placing you and Brandon in conversation multiple times. We have phone records showing calls from the hospital landline to Brandon's cell phone. We have." "What phone records?" Aurora interrupted. "I never called him. Why would I call him?" "That's what we're trying to understand." Chun leaned forward, her expression softening into something that might have been sympathy or might have been manipulation. "Help us understand, Aurora. What was your relationship with Brandon Castellano?" "There was no relationship. He was a kid. I served him breakfast." But even as she said it, Aurora's memory was churning. There had been something. Not what they were implying, never that, but something. Brandon had come in one morning in July, and he'd been crying. She'd asked if he was okay, and he'd broken down right there in the cafeteria line, told her about his parents' divorce, about his father moving to Seattle, about feeling invisible. She'd given him extra bacon, had told him things would get better, had written her work number on a napkin and told him he could call if he needed someone to talk to. "Oh God, the phone calls." "He called me," Aurora said slowly. "A few times. He was struggling. I thought I was helping." "Helping how?" Webb's tone sharpened. "Just listening, telling him to stay strong. I have 2 kids of my own. I know how hard those teenage years can be. He seemed so alone." "Did you ever meet him outside the hospital?" "No, never." "Then how did your necklace end up at the scene of his death?" That was the question, wasn't it? Aurora closed her eyes, trying to remember. The last time she'd noticed the necklace was... when? June? July? The summer had been a blur of double shifts because Maya had needed money for college and her son Tommy had gotten into some trouble with his girlfriend. Needed help with rent. I don't know, she said finally. I really don't know. Chun slid another photograph across the table. This one showed Brandon, alive, smiling, standing in front of a beach bonfire. He looked so young, so full of potential. Aurora felt tears prick her eyes. His mother never recovered, Chun said quietly. Patricia Castellano. She still lives in San Diego. Still drives past Paradise Point every day on her way to work. 23 years of not knowing. 23 years of wondering who took her son away. I didn't take anyone away, Aurora said. But her voice cracked. The interview went on for 4 more hours. They asked the same questions in different ways, showed her more evidence. Receipts from the hospital cafeteria with her handwriting, a statement from a coworker who remembered seeing Brandon talking to Aurora, a grainy security camera image that might have been her car in the Paradise Point parking lot but was so blurry it could have been anyone's. By the time they let her make her phone call, Aurora's hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial. Maya answered on the second ring. Mom? Where are you? I stopped by your house and Mrs. Kowalski said police. Baby, I need you to listen. Aurora's voice was steady now, drawn from some deep well of strength she'd cultivated through years of loss and survival. They're saying I had something to do with that boy who died in 2002. Brandon Castellano. Do you remember? Silence on the other end. Then, Mom, that's insane. I know, but they have evidence. My necklace, Grandma's necklace, they found it with his body. I need you to call a lawyer. Can you do that for me? I'm coming down there right now. No, call a lawyer first. Please, Maya. When Aurora hung up, Chun was waiting. We're going to hold you overnight, she said. The district attorney will review the evidence and decide whether to file charges in the morning. Overnight. The word felt impossible. Aurora had never spent a night away from her own bed except by choice. Vacations, visits to her sister in Phoenix, that one business conference Tommy had insisted she attend with him. I have work tomorrow. I have patients counting on me. I'm sorry, Mrs. Kelly. They took her to a holding cell. It was small and cold and smelled like desperation. There was another woman in there already. Young, maybe 30, with track marks on her arms and vacant eyes. She didn't speak, didn't even seem to see Aurora. Aurora sat on the thin mattress and stared at the cinder block wall. Someone had scratched innocent into the paint. She traced the letters with her finger, feeling the rough edges. Brandon Castellano. She tried to picture his face from those mornings in the cafeteria, but all she could see now was the photograph Chun had shown her. The beach bonfire, the smile, the life that had been cut short. What had happened to him? And how, in God's name, had her necklace ended up with his body? Outside, the sun was setting over San Diego, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Aurora couldn't see it from her cell, but she knew it was happening. The same sun that had risen that morning with all its golden promise, now sinking into the Pacific like a drowning thing. Mrs. Kowalski would be finishing her watering. Roger Chun would be putting away his lawnmower. Maya would be calling lawyers, her voice tight with fear and disbelief. And somewhere in this city, Patricia Castellano, a mother who'd spent 23 years without answers, was probably getting a phone call that would change everything. Aurora pulled her knees to her chest and began to pray. Not for deliverance, not yet, but for understanding. For truth. For whatever was coming next. Because something was coming. She could feel it in her bones, in the cold of the cell, in the weight of silence that pressed down like water. The door clanged somewhere down the corridor. Footsteps echoed. A guard laughed at someone's joke. And Aurora Kelly, who had never hurt anyone in her entire life, who had built her existence on kindness and small acts of grace, sat alone in a holding cell and wondered how the world could turn so completely upside down between one sunrise and the next. The lawyer Maya found was a woman named Rebecca Torres, sharp-featured, expensive suit, eyes that missed nothing. She arrived at the station at 9 p.m., carrying a leather briefcase and an air of absolute authority that made even Detective Chun straighten slightly when she walked in. "I'm here to see my client, Aurora Kelly," Rebecca announced to the desk sergeant. "And unless you're filing charges in the next 30 seconds, she's walking out of here with me tonight." It took 2 hours of negotiation, but by 11 p.m., Aurora was released on her own recognizance with orders not to leave San Diego County and to surrender her passport. Rebecca drove her home in a Mercedes that smelled like leather and expensive perfume. "They're going to charge you," Rebecca said without preamble as they crossed the Coronado Bridge. The bay stretched dark beneath them, city lights reflecting on water like fallen stars. "The DA has enough for an arrest. DNA evidence, circumstantial connections, and, I hate to say this, your demographic makes you vulnerable." "My demographic?" Aurora's voice was hollow. A black woman in a position of service, accused of harming a white teenager from an affluent family. The optics are terrible, and prosecutors know juries respond to narrative. We need to build our own narrative, and we need to do. The narrative is that I'm innocent. Innocence isn't a narrative, Mrs. Kelly. It's a fact that needs context, emotion, witnesses, alternative explanations. It needs a story that makes sense to 12 strangers who've already seen your mugshot on the evening news. Aurora hadn't even thought about the news. "Oh God. It'll break tomorrow," Rebecca confirmed. "Probably the morning shows. Cold case solved after 23 years. Hospital worker arrested. Your face will be everywhere. You need to prepare yourself and your family." When they pulled up to Aurora's cottage, every light was on. Maya's car was in the driveway, and through the kitchen window, Aurora could see her daughter pacing, phone pressed to her ear. Tommy's truck was there too, parked at an awkward angle like he'd arrived in a hurry. "Thank you," Aurora said to Rebecca, "for coming so fast. We'll meet tomorrow. 10 a.m., my office. Don't talk to anyone about the case. Not neighbors, not friends, not reporters. Especially not reporters." Rebecca handed her a card. "Call me if anything happens. Anything at all." The moment Aurora walked through her door, Maya burst into tears. She grabbed her mother in a fierce hug, and Aurora felt her daughter's whole body trembling. Tommy stood behind them, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "This is bullshit," he said. "Complete bullshit. Who do we sue? There's got to be someone we can sue." "Tommy language," Aurora said automatically, and then almost laughed at herself. Here she was, facing murder charges, and she was still correcting her 38-year-old son's language. Maya pulled back, wiping her eyes. She looked so much like Aurora's late husband. Same warm brown eyes, same stubborn chin. "Mom, tell us everything. What did they say? What evidence do they think they have?" They sat at Aurora's kitchen table, the same table where they'd done homework and ate birthday cakes and played cards on rainy afternoons, and Aurora told them everything. The necklace, the phone calls, the security camera image, the 23-year-old cold case suddenly hot again because of DNA advances. "But you didn't do anything," Maya said fiercely. "You couldn't have. You were home with us that whole summer. Were you though?" The thought crept in unbidden. Aurora tried to remember the summer of 2002 in detail. Maya had been 21, home from UC San Diego for break. Tommy had been 18, working construction, dating that girl. What was her name? Jessica? Jennifer? They'd both been gone a lot, living their own lives. And Aurora's husband, Marcus, had been sick. Not dying yet, that would come 2 years later, but sick enough that he spent most days in bed. How many nights had Aurora worked late shifts at the hospital? How many times had she driven home in the dark, exhausted, barely remembering the journey? "I need to remember that summer," Aurora said. "Every detail." Rebecca said, "We need to build a timeline, show where I was, what I was doing." "You were working," Tommy said. "You were always working, and taking care of Dad, and making sure we didn't starve. You didn't have time to do whatever they're saying you did. But what were they saying she did?" That was the question that kept circling in Aurora's mind. How had Brandon died? The news reports from 2002 had been vague. Suspicious death, possible overdose, investigation ongoing. She'd never followed up, never thought about it again once the media frenzy died down. Now she wished she had. Maya stayed that night, sleeping in her old room with its faded posters of Destiny's Child and movie stars Aurora could no longer name. Tommy wanted to stay too, but his wife Jennifer, Yes, that was her name. Was 8 months pregnant with their third child. So Aurora sent him home with promises to call if she needed anything. Alone in her bedroom, Aurora couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the old house settle around her, and thought about the life she'd built in this place. The walls held 43 years of memories, birthday parties and graduations, Christmas mornings and Sunday dinners, Marcus's last breath in the room down the hall. She'd painted every wall herself, had chosen every piece of furniture with care. The dresser was from a garage sale in 1987. The lamp on the nightstand had been her mother's. The quilt was sewn by her grandmother, the same grandmother who'd given her the necklace that was now sitting in an evidence locker, tagged as proof of murder. How had it ended up with Brandon's body? Aurora got up and padded to the kitchen. The broken coffee cup from that morning was still there. She'd been too shocked to clean it up before the police took her away. She knelt and picked up the pieces carefully, wrapping them in newspaper. As she wiped up the dried coffee, she heard Maya's footsteps behind her. "Can't sleep either?" her daughter asked. "I keep thinking about that necklace. When did I lose it? Where?" Maya sat at the table, pulling her knees up to her chest like she used to do as a little girl. "Do you have any pictures from that summer? Maybe they'd help you remember." Aurora did have pictures, boxes of them in the hall closet organized by year. She pulled out the one labeled 2002 and spread the photos across the table. There she was, younger by 23 years but somehow looking older, more tired. Marcus in a lawn chair, thin and pale. Tommy with his arm around a blonde girl. Definitely Jessica, not Jennifer. Maya in her college sweatshirt, laughing at something. And in several photos, Aurora was wearing the necklace. She could see it glinting at her throat in a 4th of July picture, in a snapshot of her garden, in a photo taken at the hospital during some staff appreciation event. "When was the hospital party?" Maya asked, pointing. Aurora flipped the photo over. Someone had written a date, August 12, 2002. She was wearing the necklace on August 12th. Brandon's body had been found on August 8th. "Wait," Aurora breathed. "Wait, if he died on the 8th, and I was still wearing the necklace on the 12th, then it couldn't have been at the scene when he died," Maya finished. "Mom, this is huge. This proves something's wrong with their evidence." Aurora's hands trembled as she held the photograph. Was this hope? She was afraid to trust it, afraid to believe that something so simple might unlock the mystery. They stayed up until dawn, going through every photo, creating a timeline. Maya took pictures with her phone, documenting everything. When Rebecca arrived at 10 a.m., she'd offered to pick Aurora up for their meeting. They had a manila folder full of evidence. Rebecca studied the August 12th photo for a long time. "This is good," she said finally. "But it's not conclusive. They'll argue the date on the photo is wrong, or that you went back to the scene after the 12th, or that the necklace fell off during a subsequent visit." "A subsequent visit to where?" Aurora demanded. "I was never at Paradise Point. I don't understand how any of this is possible." "That's what we need to figure out." Rebecca gathered the photos. "The prosecution's theory is that you were having an inappropriate relationship with Brandon, that he threatened to expose it, and that you killed him to keep him quiet. It's thin, but with the DNA evidence and the phone records, they think they can make it stick." Maya's face had gone pale. "That's disgusting. My mother would never." "I know," Rebecca interrupted gently. "But we need to understand what we're fighting. Aurora, I need to ask you some difficult questions, and I need you to answer honestly. I'm your lawyer. Nothing you tell me leaves this room unless you want it to." Over the next hour, Rebecca asked questions that made Aurora's skin crawl. Had she ever been attracted to Brandon? Had she ever touched him inappropriately? Had she ever given him money, gifts, special attention? Had she ever met him alone? The answer to everything was no. No, 1,000 times no. But Rebecca pushed further. "What about the phone calls? You said he called you a few times. What did you talk about?" Aurora searched her memory. His parents' divorce, school stress, feeling like nobody understood him. "I told him to talk to a counselor, to give his parents time, to focus on his future. I told him I dealt with my own depression when I was young, that it gets better. You told him about your depression? Yes. I thought it would help him feel less alone. Rebecca made a note. The prosecution will use that. They'll say you were creating intimacy. Grooming him. Grooming him. The word tasted like poison. I was trying to help a troubled kid. I believe you, Rebecca said. But we need to prove it. We need character witnesses, people who can testify to your integrity, your professionalism, your relationships with other young people. We need employment records showing your work schedule that summer. We need to find out exactly how Brandon died and create reasonable doubt about your involvement. The investigation consumed Aurora's life. She couldn't go back to work. The hospital had placed her on administrative leave the moment the charges became public. The news coverage was brutal. Her face was on every local channel, every newspaper. The stories called her the cafeteria worker and the accused killer. Stripped away her decades of service and reduced her to a headline. Neighbors who'd waved to her for years now avoided eye contact. Mrs. Kowalski stopped watering her roses when Aurora came outside. Roger Chen's lawnmower went silent whenever she appeared. The physical therapist who'd been treating her knee called to cancel future appointments. But others rallied. Her co-workers from the hospital started a petition. The pastor from her church visited every day. Her sister Donna flew in from Phoenix and moved into the guest room, cooking meals and fielding phone calls and being a steady presence when everything else felt like quicksand. Maya took leave from her job as a social worker to help with the investigation. She and Tommy became amateur detectives, tracking down everyone who'd known Brandon in 2002, trying to understand his life, his death, the mystery of how Aurora's necklace had ended up with his body. They learned that Brandon had been struggling more than anyone knew. His grades had dropped. He'd been experimenting with drugs, marijuana, pills, whatever he could find. His parents had been too consumed with their divorce to notice. His friends had been typical teenagers, self-absorbed, oblivious to real pain. And he'd died of an overdose. Not murder, technically. The original autopsy had found no signs of foul play beyond the suspicious circumstances. He'd taken a lethal combination of pills and alcohol, and his heart had stopped. But the location of his body, hidden behind a maintenance shed at Paradise Point, and the fact that someone had clearly moved him there after death, suggested another person's involvement. That person, the prosecution now claimed, was Aurora Kelly. The arraignment took place on a Tuesday morning in late October, 3 weeks after Aurora's arrest. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, curious onlookers, and in the front row, a woman Aurora recognized from old news footage. Patricia Castellano, Brandon's mother. She looked older than her years, grief etched into every line of her face. When Aurora walked in, escorted by Rebecca, Patricia's eyes locked onto her with an intensity that was almost physical. Not hatred, Aurora realized. Something worse, hope. Hope that after 23 years, she was finally looking at the person who'd taken her son. Aurora wanted to go to her, to take her hands and swear she hadn't done this. But the bailiff was already directing her to the defense table. The judge was a stern-faced woman named Barbara Chun, apparently no relation to either the detective or Roger. She read the charges in a voice devoid of emotion. Involuntary manslaughter, tampering with evidence, contributing to the delinquency of a minor. How does the defendant plead? Judge Chun asked. Aurora stood, her voice clear and steady despite the trembling in her legs. Not guilty, Your Honor. The judge set bail at $150,000. Aurora's heart sank. She didn't have that kind of money. But Maya and Tommy had been preparing. They'd taken out a loan against Aurora's house, liquidated savings, and borrowed from relatives. By afternoon, Aurora was released, an ankle monitor locked around her leg like a shackle. The real nightmare began after that. Someone spray-painted "Killer" across Aurora's garage door. She woke one morning to find all 4 of her car tires slashed. Letters arrived, some supportive but others vicious. One included a detailed description of what the writer thought should happen to child predators like her. Another contained a used syringe and a note, "Join Brandon." Maya wanted to call the police. Rebecca said it would make things worse. "We don't need you looking like a victim right before trial. It muddles the narrative." The church meetings grew tense. Aurora had been a member of Cornerstone Baptist for 30 years, had sung in the choir, had organized the clothing drive every winter. But now, when she stood to sing, voices faltered around her. When she tried to help with the food pantry, people found excuses to work elsewhere. Pastor Williams tried to help. He preached a sermon about judgment and mercy, about how innocent until proven guilty should apply in God's house as much as in court. But Aurora saw the way some congregation members whispered afterward, saw the way mothers pulled their children closer when she walked past. Only a few people stood firm. There was Gloria Martinez, who'd worked the hospital cafeteria line next to Aurora for 15 years. Gloria testified to the character witness investigator that Aurora had never shown inappropriate interest in anyone, had always maintained professional boundaries, had been the first to report concerns when she suspected patient abuse by a orderly. There was Dr. Samuel Okonkwo, who'd been a resident in 2002 and was now the hospital's chief of cardiology. He remembered Aurora sitting with him during his first night shift after a patient death, bringing him tea, listening to him cry. "She is the moral center of that hospital," he told Rebecca. "If Aurora Kelly harmed someone, I'll eat my stethoscope." There was Jamal Pierce, who'd been a troubled teen himself when Aurora had mentored him through a church program in 1998. Now he was a computer engineer with 2 kids and a mortgage. "Miss Aurora saved my life," he said simply. "Whatever they're saying she did, they're wrong." But for every supporter, there seemed to be 10 detractors. The local news ran a series called Cold Case Breakthrough that painted Aurora as a predator who'd carefully groomed Brandon over multiple cafeteria encounters. They found a photo of her smiling at a church youth event and used it under a cheerin' reading, "Trusted member of community now accused of murder." Tommy got into a fistfight at a bar when someone made a crude joke about his mother. Maya's boss suggested she take unpaid leave until things settle down. Donna's husband called from Phoenix asking when she was coming home. Her job was in jeopardy. The financial pressure was crushing. Legal fees mounted daily. Rebecca was good, the best, but she wasn't cheap. The house that Aurora and Marcus had bought in 1982 for $89,000 was now worth $750,000. But it was also Aurora's entire net worth. Rebecca estimated the trial could cost $200,000 or more if it went the distance. "We could sell," Maya suggested one night. They were sitting in Aurora's living room, going over bills by lamplight. "Get a smaller place, use the equity for your defense." "This is your inheritance," Aurora protested. "You and Tommy. I'm not spending your future on this." "Mom, we don't care about inheritance. We care about you not going to prison." Prison. The word hung in the air like smoke. Rebecca had been clear about what Aurora faced if convicted. 4 to 10 years for involuntary manslaughter, additional time for the other charges. She'd be 75 when she got out. Maybe older. Aurora looked around her living room. At the piano she'd bought used when Maya wanted lessons. At the bookshelf stuffed with paperbacks and photo albums. At the window that looked out on her garden where tomatoes hung red and heavy on the vine. This house was more than an asset. It was the physical manifestation of every choice she'd made, every sacrifice, every small joy. But what good was a house if she wasn't free to live in it? The prosecution filed additional motions. They wanted to introduce evidence of Aurora's childhood trauma. She'd been sexually abused by an uncle when she was 9. The theory was that this abuse had warped her understanding of appropriate relationships. Rebecca filed a counter-motion calling this prejudicial and irrelevant. But the judge hadn't ruled yet. They also wanted to introduce testimony from a psychological expert who'd never met Aurora but would testify about patterns of behavior in institutional predators. Rebecca was apoplectic. They're basically arguing that because you work in a hospital cafeteria, you fit a predator profile. It's offensive and it's bullshit. Discovery revealed more evidence. There were 3 more phone calls from the hospital landline to Brandon's cell than Aurora remembered. Security footage showed her car, or a car that looked like hers, a common 1998 Honda Civic, driving past Paradise Point on July 30, 2002. And there was a witness, a former resort employee named Derek Hoskins, who claimed he'd seen Aurora and Brandon together near the beach one evening. I never met him outside the hospital, Aurora insisted for the 100th time. This Derek person is lying or mistaken. But when Rebecca's investigator tracked down Hoskins, he was adamant. I remember because she was wearing this silver necklace that caught the light, he said. And the kid was crying. She had her arm around him. The necklace detail was devastating. How could Hoskins know about the necklace unless he'd really seen Aurora wearing it? Maya found the answer in a 2002 police report. Hoskins had been questioned during the original investigation because he'd discovered Brandon's body. He'd been shown photographs of evidence, including the necklace. His memory wasn't of seeing Aurora. It was of seeing the necklace in a photo and, 23 years later, constructing a false memory that felt real. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Rebecca planned to destroy him on cross-examination. But it was another reminder of how fragile truth could be, how easily memory could be manipulated or corrupted. The lowest point came in November. Aurora woke to find news vans parked outside her house. A documentary crew had gotten footage of her walking to her car, and they'd edited it with ominous music and a voiceover asking, "What really happened to Brandon Castellano?" The documentary was streaming on a major platform, had millions of views, and featured an expert claiming Aurora displayed classic psychopathic traits. Aurora stopped going outside except when absolutely necessary. The ankle monitor beeped if she went beyond her allowed radius, a constant reminder that she wasn't free. She couldn't go to church, too many cameras. Couldn't go to the grocery store, too many stairs. Maya did the shopping. Tommy handled anything that required leaving the house. Aurora's world shrank to the walls of her cottage, and inside those walls, she fought to hold on to herself. She gardened. The tomatoes gave way to wintergreens, kale and chard and spinach. She dug in the soil until her hands were black with earth, and she prayed. Not elegant prayers, just desperate whispers. Help me. Guide me. Don't let me break. She cooked. Enormous pots of gumbo and jambalaya. Her mother's recipes. Food that tasted like home and memory. She froze it in containers and gave it to Maya to distribute to her supporters. If she couldn't leave her house, at least she could still feed people. That had always been her gift, nourishment, comfort, the small grace of a warm meal. She read. Rebecca had given her the complete case file, thousands of pages of police reports, witness statements, forensic analyses. Aurora read every word, trying to find the crack in their theory, the place where the truth might shine through. And she remembered. She forced herself back to 2002, day by day, shift by shift. She kept a daily planner that year. Marcus had given it to her for Christmas 2001. A simple thing with inspirational quotes at the top of each page. Maya found it in a box in the garage, water-stained but mostly legible. Aurora's handwriting marched across the pages. 7 to 3 shift. Marcus Dr. appointment 2 p.m. Tommy needs $40. Double shift. Maya called. Dean's list. Pot roast for dinner. Marcus bad day. Called in sick. Pastor Williams visited. She documented her entire life without knowing it would one day be her alibi. On August 8, 2002, the day Brandon died, Aurora's planner showed 6 to 2 shift. Pick up Marcus prescription. Tommy's girlfriend drama. Exhausted. She remembered that day now. Marcus had been in pain, needed his medication refilled. She'd left work at 2:15, had gone straight to the pharmacy on Sports Arena Boulevard. Had waited 40 minutes because they were short-staffed. Then home. Tommy had been there, pacing the kitchen, furious because Jessica had broken up with him. They talked until dinner. Marcus had barely eaten. Aurora had gone to bed at 9 o'clock, bone-tired. No time to drive to Paradise Point. No opportunity to meet Brandon, to watch him die, to move his body. But the prosecution had an answer for this too. Their theory was that Aurora had met Brandon earlier, maybe the night before, maybe that morning before her shift. That she'd given him the pills that killed him, maybe not intending murder but criminally negligent nonetheless. That the timeline wasn't as tight as the defense claimed. Rebecca brought in a forensic pathologist to review the autopsy. Dr. Lee Seung-Nguyen was a tiny Vietnamese woman with steel-gray hair and the kind of confidence that came from testifying in hundreds of trials. She studied the reports for 3 days, then delivered her opinion. Time of death is estimated between 10 p.m. on August 7th and 2 a.m. on August 8th, based on body temperature, rigor mortis, and insect activity. The victim died where he was found. There's lividity consistent with the position of the body. Toxicology shows a massive overdose of oxycodone and alcohol. This wasn't a gradual ingestion. He took or was given a large quantity in a short period. So Aurora couldn't have given him pills during her work shift on August 8th? Rebecca asked. Not unless she has a time machine. He was already dead by the time her shift started at 6 a.m. It was good news, but Rebecca cautioned against celebration. They'll adjust their theory. They'll say it happened the night before. We need to know where you were on the evening of August 7th. Aurora checked her planner. Home. Marcus had a bad day. Can anyone corroborate that? Marcus was dead. Tommy had been out with friends. He'd come home late, hadn't seen her. Maya had been at a concert with college friends. No alibi, just Aurora's word, and that wasn't enough. The holidays approached like a funeral procession. Thanksgiving came and went. Maya and Tommy insisted on coming over, bringing food, pretending everything was normal. But the turkey tasted like sawdust in Aurora's mouth, and when they held hands to say grace, Aurora's prayer caught in her throat. I'm grateful for you both, she managed. For your faith in me, for your love. I don't know what I'd do without you. We're not going anywhere, Mom, Tommy said fiercely. Not ever. But Aurora saw the exhaustion in their eyes. Tommy's wife, Jennifer, had given birth to a baby girl. They'd named her Aurora, which made Aurora cry for an hour, and Tommy was splitting his time between his new daughter and his mother's legal crisis. Maya had lost weight, had dark circles under her eyes, had started seeing a therapist to deal with the stress. This was what hurt most. Not the accusations, not the legal jeopardy, but watching her children suffer because of something she didn't do. December brought a new development. Rebecca's investigator, an ex-cop named Frank Delgado, had been digging into Brandon's life in 2002. He tracked down Brandon's friends, his teachers, his drug dealer. A guy named Casey who was now serving time for armed robbery and willing to talk. Brandon was into some heavy stuff that summer. Casey told them via video call from prison. Pills, mostly. Oxy. He'd buy from me, but he was also getting stuff from someone else. I asked him once where, and he got real secretive. Said it was someone who wouldn't get in trouble. Someone who wouldn't get in trouble? Rebecca pressed. What does that mean? I don't know. I figured maybe a doctor or a pharmacist. Someone legit. Aurora's heart sank. The prosecution would use this, would say that Aurora, with her hospital access, had been supplying Brandon with pills. Never mind that she worked in the cafeteria, not the pharmacy. Never mind that she'd never stolen so much as a packet of sugar from the hospital. But Frank wasn't finished. There's something else. I pulled Brandon's phone records, full records, not just the calls to and from the hospital. In the weeks before he died, he was calling another number repeatedly. A cell phone registered to a James Castellano. His father, Rebecca said. Right. But here's the thing, James Castellano was in Seattle by then. The divorce was finalized in June. He'd moved, started a new life. And according to these records, Brandon called him 18 times in the 2 weeks before he died. Not one call was returned. Aurora closed her eyes. The picture was becoming clearer. A boy in pain, reaching out to a father who wouldn't answer, spiraling into depression and drug use, looking for comfort anywhere he could find it, including a kind woman in a hospital cafeteria who told him things would get better. Frank had more. He'd found Brandon's diary. Patricia had kept it all these years, couldn't bear to look at it but couldn't throw it away either. Rebecca got a court order to review it, and what they found was heartbreaking. Brandon had written about feeling invisible, about his parents fighting, about wanting to disappear. He'd written about doing drugs, about the high being the only time he felt okay. And he'd written about the lady at the hospital who'd been nice to him, who'd listened. But there was nothing inappropriate in his descriptions. Nothing suggesting a romantic or sexual relationship. Just gratitude for small kindnesses. She gave me extra toast today and asked how I was doing. Nobody else even sees me. The prosecution tried to block the diary from evidence, arguing it was hearsay. But Judge Chun ruled it admissible, and Aurora saw it as a lifeline. This was proof, Brandon's own words, that their relationship had been innocent. Yet the diary also contained a troubling entry from August 6th, 2 days before his death. I'm going to tell her everything tomorrow. Maybe she can help. She said I could call any time. I'm scared, but I have to do something before I do something stupid. Tell her what? The prosecution would argue Brandon had been planning to expose their relationship, forcing Aurora to silence him. The defense argued he'd been planning to confide in her about his drug problem. Looking for help. Same words, two completely different stories. Christmas week brought a cold snap to San Diego. Aurora watched frost form on her windows and thought about Brandon. Dead at 17. Buried in some cemetery she'd never visited. She thought about Patricia, spending another Christmas without her son. She thought about all the people whose lives had been shattered by whatever had happened on that August night in 2002. And she thought about the truth, slippery as ice, somewhere just out of reach. On Christmas Eve, Maya found Aurora in the garden, pulling weeds by flashlight. "Mom, what are you doing? It's freezing out here." "I needed to feel useful," Aurora said. Her hands were numb, her breath visible in the cold air. "I needed to do something that makes sense." Maya knelt beside her, taking her mother's frozen hands in her own warm ones. "We're going to prove you didn't do this. Rebecca says the forensics are on our side. The timeline doesn't work. Brandon's diary helps. We're building a strong case. But will it be enough?" Aurora's voice cracked. "That woman, Patricia, she's been waiting 23 years for answers. What if the jury decides I'm the answer she deserves, whether it's true or not? Then we appeal, and we appeal again, and we keep fighting until—" "Maya, I'm 65 years old. How many years do I have left? 10? 15? I can't spend them all fighting this." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm tired, baby. So tired." They sat together in the frozen garden, surrounded by winter greens and dormant soil, and Aurora let herself cry for the first time since this nightmare began. She cried for Brandon, for his wasted life and the pain he'd carried. She cried for Patricia's 23 years of grief. She cried for her own children, forced to watch their mother be destroyed by accusations she couldn't disprove. She cried for Marcus, grateful he wasn't alive to see this. And she cried for herself, for the life she'd built so carefully, now crumbling like old brick. When the tears finally stopped, Maya helped her up. "Come inside, Mom. Tommy and Jennifer are coming over. We're going to have Christmas, and we're going to remember who you are, not what they're saying you are." Inside, Tommy had set up a small tree, nothing like the elaborate ones they used to have, but decorated with ornaments from Aurora's childhood. Her grandchildren played on the floor, Tommy's 3 kids, Maya's son from her first marriage. The baby, little Aurora, slept in a bassinet, oblivious to the storm around her namesake. They sang carols. They ate ham and sweet potato pie. They opened modest gifts. Nobody had money for extravagance this year. And for a few hours, Aurora almost forgot about the trial looming in January, about the ankle monitor cutting into her flesh, about the fact that this might be her last Christmas as a free woman. Almost. On New Year's Eve, Rebecca called with news. "The prosecution is offering a plea deal." Aurora's stomach dropped. "What kind of deal?" "Involuntary manslaughter, 5 years, eligible for parole in 3. They'll drop the other charges. You'd be out by the time you're 69, maybe 68 with good behavior. They want me to confess to something I didn't do. They want to close a cold case and get a conviction. Patricia Castellano wants closure. The DA wants a win. And they're offering you a way out of a trial that could end with you serving 10 years or more. What do you think I should do?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "I think we can win at trial. The forensics support you. The timeline is tight. Brandon's diary helps. But trials are unpredictable, and the DNA evidence is powerful. If you take the deal, you have certainty. If we go to trial, you're rolling the dice. I can't confess to killing that boy, Aurora said. I won't. Not even to save myself. Then we go to trial. Jury selection starts January 15th. Aurora spent New Year's Eve alone. Maya and Tommy had wanted to stay, but she'd sent them home to their families. She sat in her living room, watching the clock tick toward midnight, thinking about time. How it moved forward relentlessly, how it healed some wounds and deepened others, how it could turn a kind gesture into evidence of murder. At midnight, fireworks exploded over the bay. She could hear them through her windows, could see colored light reflecting off the water. People were celebrating new beginnings, fresh starts, hope for the year ahead. Aurora poured herself a glass of water and raised it in a solitary toast. To truth, she whispered, wherever you're hiding. The trial began on a Monday morning in mid-January, under a sky so clear and blue it seemed obscene. Aurora wore a navy dress that Maya had bought for her. Modest, respectable, the costume of innocence. Rebecca had coached her on courtroom behavior. Sit up straight, don't fidget, react minimally to testimony. Make eye contact with jurors but don't stare. The jury was 12 people who would decide her fate. 7 women, 5 men, ranging from mid-20s to late 60s. A construction worker, a retired teacher, a nurse, a software engineer, a dental hygienist, people whose names Aurora had memorized, whose faces she studied during voir dire, trying to see who might believe her, who might be her salvation. The prosecution's opening statement was delivered by Deputy District Attorney Martin Chun. Yet another Chun, San Diego apparently swimming with them. He was smooth, charismatic, mid-40s with perfectly styled hair, and a voice pitched for maximum sympathy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about trust betrayed. Brandon Castellano was 17 years old, vulnerable, hurting. His parents were divorcing. His father had abandoned him. He was looking for someone, anyone, to tell him things would be okay. And he found Aurora Kelly. Martin gestured toward her, and 12 pairs of eyes swiveled. Aurora kept her face neutral, just as Rebecca had taught her. Aurora Kelly worked in the hospital cafeteria. She was a fixture there, someone people trusted, someone who seemed kind. And she was kind to Brandon at first. She gave him extra food. She listened to his problems. She gave him her phone number. And then, gradually, that relationship became something darker. Aurora wanted to scream. There was no dark relationship. There was a troubled kid and a woman who'd tried to help. Martin continued, building his narrative with skill. He showed the jury the phone records, 7 calls from the hospital to Brandon's cell. He showed them the security footage of a Honda Civic near Paradise Point. He introduced the necklace, Aurora's DNA on the clasp, found with Brandon's body. The defense will tell you this is all circumstantial. That DNA on a necklace doesn't prove murder. And they're right, it doesn't. But combined with everything else, the phone calls, the secret meetings, Brandon's diary entry about telling someone his problems, paints a picture. A picture of a woman who got involved in a teenage boy's life, who provided him with prescription pills from her workplace, who panicked when he threatened to expose their relationship, and who made a terrible choice. He paused, let the words sink in. Brandon Castellano died alone, behind a maintenance shed, his body hidden away like trash. His mother spent 23 years not knowing what happened to her son. But now we know. Now we have science DNA evidence. And that evidence points to one person, Aurora Kelly. We will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she caused Brandon's death. And we will finally give Patricia Castellano the justice she's waited over 2 decades to receive. She looked out at the bay, at the heron on the rocky shore, at the moon rising over the water, the same view from that terrible morning when police arrived. Everything was different now. Or maybe Aurora was different. Maybe that was all transformation ever was. Not the world changing, but learning to see it new. If Aurora's journey of resilience moved you, don't miss future stories that illuminate the human spirit. Subscribe now to receive gripping narratives of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Tales of wrongful accusations, hard-won justice, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Each story explores the complexity of truth, the strength found in darkness, and the transformation that comes from survival. Join our community of readers who believe in the power of storytelling to inspire change and understanding. When he sat down, the courtroom was silent. Aurora felt the weight of those 12 gazes, felt them measuring her, judging her, deciding if she looked like a killer. Rebecca's opening was quieter, less theatrical, but no less powerful. The prosecution just told you a story. It was a compelling story, well told, designed to tug at your heartstrings. But it was just that, a story, not evidence, not proof, a narrative constructed to fit a predetermined conclusion. She walked toward the jury box, made eye contact with each juror. Here are the facts. Aurora Kelly is a 65-year-old woman who has worked at Mercy Hospital for 22 years. She has no criminal record. She raised 2 children as a single parent after her husband died. She volunteers at her church. She mentors troubled youth. Every person who knows her describes her the same way. Kind, generous, professional, trustworthy. Rebecca held up a copy of Brandon's diary. Brandon Castellano was a troubled teenager. His own words tell us he was depressed, using drugs, desperate for help. He reached out to Aurora because she showed him basic human kindness. There was nothing inappropriate about their relationship. Nothing. Brandon's diary confirms this. He wrote about a lady at the hospital who was nice to him. That's it. That's the extent of their interaction. She moved to the evidence table, picked up a photo. This is Aurora wearing her grandmother's necklace on August 12, 2002, 4 days after Brandon died. How could her necklace be at a crime scene on August 8 when she was still wearing it on August 12? The prosecution has no answer for this. They'll tell you the photo date is wrong, or that she went back to the scene later. But those are guesses, not evidence. Rebecca's voice hardened. The timeline doesn't work. Forensic evidence shows Brandon died between 10 p.m. on August 7th and 2 a.m. on August 8th. Aurora was home with her sick husband. She had no opportunity to meet Brandon, no motive to harm him, no means to commit this crime. The prosecution has built an elaborate theory on a foundation of coincidence and assumption. But that's not proof. That's not justice. She returned to her table, stood beside Aurora. At the end of this trial, when you've heard all the evidence, you'll see that Aurora Kelly is innocent. Not just not proven guilty, but innocent. And you'll see that Brandon Castellano's real killer, if there was one, has never been found. Don't let the prosecution pressure you into convicting an innocent woman just because they need to close a cold case. Demand real evidence. Demand real proof. Demand justice. The prosecution called their witnesses over the next week. Detective Chun testified about the DNA evidence, showing the jury photos of the necklace, explaining the science of skin cell transfer. On cross-examination, Rebecca got her to admit that DNA on a necklace only proved Aurora had worn it. Not when, not where, not in what context. Derek Hoskins, the Paradise Point employee, testified that he'd seen Aurora and Brandon together near the beach. Rebecca destroyed him methodically, showing his original police statement from 2002 that made no mention of Aurora. Showing that he'd been shown photos of evidence, including the necklace, during the original investigation. Getting him to admit he couldn't remember what he'd had for breakfast yesterday, let alone the specific details of an encounter 23 years ago. Isn't it possible, Rebecca asked softly, that you've constructed a memory based on photographs you saw, rather than an actual event you witnessed? Hoskins shifted uncomfortably. I remember seeing them. Do you remember what Aurora was wearing, besides the necklace? No. What time of day was it? Evening, I think. What were they talking about? I couldn't hear. How far away were you? Maybe 50 feet? So you were 50 feet away, couldn't hear their conversation, can't remember the time of day, what she was wearing, or any specific details. But you're certain it was Aurora Kelly and Brandon Castellano? The necklace you saw in a police photograph. No further questions. But the most damaging testimony came from Dr. Richard Knowles, the toxicologist. He explained Brandon's cause of death in clinical detail. Massive overdose of oxycodone combined with alcohol, leading to respiratory depression and cardiac arrest. Would this have been accidental? Martin Chen asked. Possible, but unlikely. The amount of oxycodone in his system was extremely high, equivalent to taking 15 to 20 pills at once. That's not typically accidental ingestion. Could someone have given him these pills? Objection, Rebecca called. Speculation. Sustained. But the seed was planted. Martin moved on. Dr. Knowles, in your expert opinion, where might someone obtain that quantity of oxycodone in 2002? Either from a pharmacy with a legitimate prescription or diverted from a medical facility. What do you mean by diverted? Stolen or improperly obtained from a hospital, clinic, or similar institution. Martin made sure the jury understood. Aurora worked in a hospital. Oxycodone was available in that hospital. Therefore, Aurora could have provided Brandon with the pills that killed him. On cross-examination, Rebecca fought back. Dr. Knowles, does working in a hospital cafeteria give someone access to the pharmacy? Not typically, no. Are cafeteria workers allowed in medication storage areas? No. So the fact that Aurora worked at Mercy Hospital doesn't actually mean she had access to prescription medications. Does it? Not directly, no. And there are many other ways someone could obtain oxycodone in 2002, correct? Yes. Street dealers, pill mills, online pharmacies, legitimate prescriptions that were shared or sold. So Brandon could have gotten these pills from literally dozens of sources that had nothing to do with Aurora Kelly? Objection argumentative, Martin called. Withdrawn. Rebecca smiled. No further questions. The second week brought character witnesses. The prosecution called people who'd worked at the hospital in 2002, trying to establish that Aurora had behaved inappropriately with Brandon. But their testimony was weak. I saw them talking once. She seemed friendly with him. I thought it was odd. Nothing concrete, nothing damning. Then Patricia Castellano took the stand. She moved slowly, aged by grief. When she was sworn in, her hand trembled on the Bible. Martin Chen approached her gently, aware that this moment was why they were all here. Mrs. Castellano, can you tell the jury about your son Brandon? Patricia's voice was barely audible. He was a good boy, creative, sensitive. He loved skateboarding and drawing. He wanted to be an animator someday. Tears slipped down her cheeks. He was struggling when his father and I divorced, but I thought he'd get through it. Teenagers struggle. It's normal. I thought he'd be okay. When did you last see Brandon? August 7th, 2002. He left the house around 8 that evening. Said he was meeting friends. I told him to be home by midnight. He never came home. Patricia broke down completely. The judge called a recess. When they returned, Patricia had composed herself slightly. Mrs. Castellano, did Brandon ever mention a woman named Aurora Kelly? No, not that I remember. Did he ever mention someone at the hospital who was helping him? He said, once he said there was a lady who was nice to him, but he didn't give a name. Rebecca's cross-examination was brief and respectful. Mrs. Castellano, I'm so sorry for your loss. No one should have to endure what you've endured. Patricia nodded, wiping her eyes. Did Brandon ever say anything negative about this lady at the hospital? No. Did he ever suggest there was anything inappropriate about their relationship? No. Thank you. No further questions. The defense case began in the third week. Rebecca called Dr. Lisa Nguyen, their forensic pathologist, who testified about the timeline. Based on the autopsy findings, Brandon Castellano died between 10 p.m. on August 7th and 2 a.m. on August 8th. He died where he was found. There's clear evidence of that in the lividity patterns. Rebecca showed the jury Aurora's work schedule. Dr. Nguyen, Aurora Kelly worked from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. on August 8th. Could she have been involved in Brandon's death? Not unless she traveled backward in time. He was already dead when her shift started. Martin Chen attacked on cross-examination. Dr. Nguyen, couldn't Aurora have given Brandon the pills earlier? Say on August 7th, and those pills caused his death that night? It's possible, but the toxicology suggests the pills were taken within a few hours of death. This was a large, concentrated dose, not something that built up over time. The defense brought Gloria Martinez, who testified about Aurora's professionalism and character. Dr. Okonkwo, who spoke about Aurora's compassion and integrity. Jamal Pierce, who described how Aurora had mentored him through his troubled teenage years. Maya and Tommy both testified. Maya spoke about her mother's presence in their lives, about how Aurora had always been home. Her gift, nourishment, comfort through food. She wrote pages and pages in a journal Donna had brought her, trying to document every moment of that summer in 2002. What had she been thinking about? What had worried her? She remembered Marcus's illness consuming her thoughts, the medical bills piling up, the fear that she'd lose him before they'd had enough time. She remembered Maya's college tuition payments, Tommy's need for a security deposit on his first apartment. She remembered working double shifts and coming home so tired she'd fall asleep in her clothes. But Brandon Castellano? He'd been a kind interaction, nothing more. A kid who needed an adult to see him, and she'd done what came naturally. She'd been present, she'd listened. That was all, wasn't it? In December, Rebecca scheduled a meeting with the prosecution to discuss a plea deal. Aurora refused to even consider it. "I won't plead guilty to something I didn't do," she said firmly. "I won't stand in front of Patricia Castellano and lie and say I killed her son." "They're offering 5 years with possibility of parole in 3, Rebecca pressed. "If we go to trial and lose, you're looking at a decade minimum. Then we go to trial and we win." Rebecca studied her across the desk. "You have remarkable faith in the justice system for someone who's being failed by it." "I have faith in the truth," Aurora corrected. "The truth is on my side." But truth, Aurora was learning, was a slippery thing. The truth was that her necklace had been found with Brandon's body. The truth was that she'd had phone conversations with him. The truth was that witnesses claimed to have seen them together. These were facts, and facts were a kind of truth. But they weren't the truth, the deep truth of what had actually happened. And that truth remained elusive, hidden somewhere in the fog of 23 years. Christmas came. Aurora had always hosted, 20 or 30 people crammed into her house, eating ham and sweet potato pie, exchanging gifts, singing carols. This year it was just her, Maya, Tommy, Jennifer, their kids, and Donna. The children, Tommy's 8-year-old twins and his new baby daughter, were too young to understand why Grandma Aurora couldn't come to their house, why they had to keep the curtains closed, why photographers sometimes stood on the sidewalk outside. Aurora held her newest granddaughter, Zoe, and felt something crack inside her chest. This child had been born into a world where her grandmother was an accused killer. What would Zoe be told as she grew up? Would she remember Aurora at all, or would she just know the story, the cold case, the arrest, the trial? "I'm sorry," Aurora whispered into the baby's downy hair. "I'm so sorry you're part of this." Jennifer, who'd been distant and uncomfortable during the whole ordeal, surprised Aurora by sitting beside her on the couch. "Zoe's lucky to have you as her grandmother," she said quietly. "The twins talk about you constantly. They know you're a good person. We all do." It was such a small kindness, but it undid Aurora completely. She wept into Jennifer's shoulder while the baby squirmed between them, and Tommy put on a kids' movie to distract the twins from the sight of their grandmother falling apart. After Christmas, the pace intensified. The trial was set for February. Rebecca's team worked around the clock, interviewing witnesses, building timelines, consulting experts. They found Dr. Helena Voss, a forensic pathologist who reviewed Brandon's autopsy and found inconsistencies in the original report. The body had been moved after death, yes, but there were also marks suggesting he'd been carried or dragged by someone significantly larger than Aurora's 5'4" frame. They found Michael Chen, yet another Chen, no relation to the detective or the judge, who'd been Brandon's best friend in 2002. Michael had never been properly interviewed during the original investigation. Now a father of 3 living in Oregon, he told Rebecca's investigator that Brandon had been getting drugs from a dealer named Snake or Viper, some nickname like that. He'd been in over his head, owed money, was scared. This was new information. This suggested an alternative suspect, a different narrative. Rebecca filed motions to investigate this angle, but the prosecution fought back. They argued it was a distraction, that the physical evidence clearly pointed to Aurora. The necklace was the anchor that kept dragging Aurora down. No matter what alternative theories they proposed, it always came back to that silver chain with its bird pendant. Her DNA, Brandon's death, the impossible connection. In January, Aurora's former colleague Gloria provided a crucial piece of information. She'd been cleaning out her garage and found an old day planner from 2002. Cafeteria workers used them to track schedule swaps and shift coverage. Gloria's planner showed that Aurora had worked the morning shift on August 8th, the day Brandon died, from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Paradise Point is a 40-minute drive from the hospital, Rebecca said, excitement creeping into her professional composure. If Brandon died in the late afternoon or evening, which the autopsy suggests, you would have had to leave work at 2, drive 40 minutes, somehow get Brandon out there, administer the drugs, and then, what? Just go home? With no one noticing. Unless she went back later, the prosecution argued in their response. Evening shift. Drove out after dark. But Aurora's shift schedule showed she'd worked a double that day, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., covering for someone who'd called in sick. 23 time-stamped transactions from the register Aurora operated proved she'd been at the hospital all day. This is huge, Maya breathed when Rebecca shared the news. This proves you couldn't have been there when he died. It proves she probably wasn't there during the narrow time window the original autopsy suggested, Rebecca cautioned. But they'll argue the time of death was never definitively established. They'll say she could have gone earlier or later. The schedule helps, but it's not a smoking gun. Still, it was something. The first real, concrete evidence that Aurora's story made sense. That her presence at the hospital was documented, verifiable, real. The prosecution's case began to show cracks. Derek Hoskins, the witness who claimed to have seen Aurora and Brandon together, failed a polygraph test administered by Rebecca's team. Under more rigorous questioning, he admitted he might have been mistaken about the date, the time, even whether it had been Aurora at all. The security footage of the car driving past Paradise Point was enhanced by a video expert who pointed out that the license plate was partially obscured but didn't match Aurora's car's plate. Similar car, different vehicle. And then came the break they'd been waiting for. Tommy, who'd been obsessively researching the original investigation, found something in the public records. In 2002, Paradise Point Resort had been doing major renovations. The area where Brandon's body was found had been a construction zone, closed to the public, accessible only to workers. Rebecca's investigator obtained a list of construction workers on site that summer. 47 names. They started tracking them down one by one, looking for anyone with a connection to Brandon, to drugs, to anything that might explain what had really happened. Number 33 was a man named Frank Morales. He'd worked at Paradise Point for 6 months in 2002, then disappeared. No forwarding address, no tax returns filed. Nothing. He'd effectively vanished. Except Tommy found him. Using social media, cross-referencing names, following digital breadcrumbs across 2 decades, Tommy found Frank Morales living in Tucson under the name Francisco Moreno. And Frank Morales had a record. Multiple drug charges, theft, assault. In 2004, he'd been questioned in connection with another suspicious death. A teenage girl who'd overdosed in similar circumstances. Rebecca brought this information to the judge. Your Honor, we have credible evidence of an alternative suspect with means, opportunity, and a history of similar crimes. The defense requests additional time to investigate and the right to present this evidence at trial. The prosecution fought it. This is a last-minute Hail Mary, the DA argued. Mrs. Kelly's defense team is trying to throw mud on the wall and see what sticks. The evidence against the defendant is solid. Judge Chun took a week to deliberate. During that week, Aurora lived in a strange suspended state, afraid to hope but unable to stop herself. What if Frank Morales was the answer? What if there was a simple, horrible explanation that had nothing to do with her? The judge ruled in their favor. The trial was postponed to April. Rebecca's team was authorized to investigate Frank Morales fully, and the prosecution was ordered to turn over any evidence they had that might support the alternative suspect theory. The news coverage shifted. Suddenly, there were questions about the original investigation. Had police missed crucial evidence? Had they focused too narrowly on Aurora because of the necklace and ignored other possibilities? A local crime podcast started a series called Who Really Killed Brandon Castellano and interviewed Michael Chun about the drug dealer connection. Patricia Castellano appeared on the news, looking fragile and confused. "I just want the truth," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought we finally had answers, but now, I don't know what to believe." Aurora watched that interview in her living room, surrounded by legal documents and empty coffee cups, and felt something shift inside her. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt not just her own pain but Patricia's, the excruciating weight of not knowing, of living in perpetual limbo. "I didn't kill your son," Aurora whispered to the television screen, "but I will help you find out who did." It became her mission, not just proving her innocence, but solving the mystery. Brandon deserved justice. Patricia deserved peace. And somewhere in the tangled web of the past, there was truth waiting to be found. On March 28th, all charges against Aurora Kelly were dropped after 6 months of hell. Frank Morales, a construction worker who'd reinvented himself as Francisco Moreno in Tucson, had finally been caught. The truth emerged in devastating fragments. Frank had been dealing drugs on the side, and 17-year-old Brandon Castellano had been one of his customers. When Brandon couldn't pay the $500 he owed, Frank had confronted him behind the Paradise Point maintenance shed on August 8, 2002. He'd given Brandon pills to take the edge off, and when the teenager mixed them with alcohol and collapsed, Frank panicked and ran, but not before dropping Aurora's stolen necklace at the scene. For 23 years, Frank had lived with guilt and fear, changing his name and moving to Arizona. He might have escaped forever if Tommy Kelly hadn't been as relentless as his mother was innocent. The investigator Rebecca hired found a pawn shop receipt from August 15, 2002. Frank had pawned Aurora's necklace a week after Brandon died. Records showed Frank had been at Mercy Hospital on July 29 installing a CT scanner, the same day Aurora reported her necklace missing from her locker. He'd stolen it planning to pawn it, and it had fallen from his pocket while he checked Brandon's pulse. When confronted with the evidence, Frank finally broke. He insisted it had been an accident, that he'd never meant for Brandon to die, but admitted being there, giving Brandon the drugs and running. He was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter, drug distribution, and tampering with evidence. The DA held a press conference. Aurora watched from her living room surrounded by family, and when the words "all charges dropped" were spoken, Maya burst into tears. Tommy punched the air, and Donna prayed aloud. But Aurora felt only emptiness, like she'd held her breath for so long she'd forgotten how to breathe. The apologies came fast. Detective Chin met with Aurora privately, admitting they'd failed her, failed Brandon, failed justice by following evidence that confirmed their theory while ignoring what didn't. The hospital called offering her job back with reinstated benefits and back pay. The church held a special service. Neighbors appeared with casseroles and apologies. Mrs. Kowalski brought flowers, crying. Roger Chin fixed the mailbox he'd pretended not to notice was vandalized. Patricia Castellano called too. Aurora almost didn't answer, but when she did, Patricia's voice trembled with the need to apologize. Aurora stopped her gently, insisting that Patricia was simply a grieving mother looking for justice, not someone who needed forgiveness. Patricia's voice broke as she thanked Aurora for Tommy, who had solved the case police couldn't solve for 23 years because he believed in his mother so completely. They agreed to meet. A week later, they sat in a small cafe near the water. Patricia was smaller than she looked on TV, fragile in a way that made Aurora's heart hurt. Patricia told Aurora about the real Brandon. Not the troubled kid from news reports, but a boy who loved skateboarding and tacos and terrible comedy movies, who wanted to be a marine biologist, who called his mother every night after his parents separated. The divorce had destroyed him, and wrapped in their own pain, his parents hadn't seen how much he was suffering. They talked for 3 hours, and by the end, something had shifted between them. Not friendship exactly, but understanding. Two women hurt by the same violence, who'd survived the same storm, who recognized in each other a terrible strength. Returning to work proved harder than Aurora expected. She stood in the parking lot for 20 minutes, unable to make herself walk through the doors. The cafeteria staff had hung a welcome banner. Gloria and the others crowded around with cards and gifts, including a new silver necklace with a bird pendant. Doctors came to shake her hand, telling her they'd never doubted her, though Aurora remembered the silence when charges were first announced. But the patients were different. They didn't recognize her from the news, and that anonymity was a gift. The nightmares came anyway. Dreams of guilty verdicts, of her necklace choking her, of people turning their backs. Aurora started therapy with Dr. Lisa Park, slowly unpacking the violation of having her life dissected publicly, the powerlessness of false accusation, the particular sting of her kindness being twisted into evidence of wrongdoing. She found herself pulling back at work, being cordial but distant, no longer offering the open ear that had once defined her. Gloria noticed, "Don't let them take that away from you. Your heart. The thing that makes you you." Aurora joined a support group for the wrongfully accused, meeting in a church basement with people whose lives had been upended by false charges. There was Marcus, who'd spent 8 years in prison before DNA freed him. Jennifer, whose ex-husband had falsely accused her of child abuse. Carlos, arrested at 19 for murder he didn't commit. Their stories made Aurora's 6 months feel simultaneously shorter and longer. She hadn't lost years to prison, but she'd lost her sense of safety, her faith that being good protected you from harm. In that church basement, Aurora found her voice again. She started speaking at community events about criminal justice reform, about the danger of building cases around single pieces of evidence without considering alternatives, about presuming innocence not just in courtrooms but in communities. The San Diego Tribune featured her story, from accused to advocate. Tommy discovered he had a talent for investigation and enrolled in forensic science courses, talking about becoming a private investigator specializing in cold cases. Maya focused her social work on families navigating the criminal justice system, helping those who didn't have a family willing to fight. 6 months after charges were dropped, the San Diego Police Department issued a formal apology. Chief Rodriguez announced new protocols: mandatory consideration of alternative suspects, independent review of cold case evidence, training on confirmation bias. Patricia Castellano spoke at the press conference, her voice stronger than Aurora had ever heard it, saying they couldn't bring Brandon back but could honor his memory by doing better. Afterward, Patricia and Aurora sat on a bench overlooking the bay. Patricia visited Brandon's grave every week for 23 years, talking to him about everything. Now she told him the truth, that the man who gave him the drugs finally faced justice, that the wrongly accused woman had been freed, that his death had changed things in small ways. And she told him about Aurora, about how she tried to help him that summer, about how she'd been one of the few adults who saw he was struggling. Patricia told Brandon she'd apologize to Aurora, even though she didn't deserve forgiveness. Aurora squeezed her hand. Forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about releasing. For both of us. As summer arrived, Aurora's garden exploded with life, and she gave away bags of vegetables to everyone, returning to what she did best: feeding people, nourishing them. The hospital threw a party for her 66th birthday with a cake shaped like a bird, wings spread in flight. Gloria's toast had everyone crying. To Aurora, who fell but learned to fly again. That night, Aurora wrote in her journal that she wasn't the same woman from a year ago. That woman was innocent in ways Aurora could never be again. Innocent of knowing that goodness doesn't protect you, that truth doesn't always win quickly. But she was also stronger now, knowing her strength, knowing she could survive almost anything. And she knew that even in darkness, there were people who would hold a light. Maya, Tommy, Donna, Rebecca, Gloria, Dr. Okonkwo, even Patricia. She was held by love, and that made her unbreakable. She looked out at the bay, at the heron on the rocky shore, at the moon rising over the water, the same view from that terrible morning when police arrived. Everything was different now. Or maybe Aurora was different. Maybe that was all transformation ever was. Not the world changing, but learning to see it new. If Aurora's journey of resilience moved you, don't miss future stories that illuminate the human spirit. Subscribe now to receive gripping narratives of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges, tales of wrongful accusations, hard-won justice, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Each story explores the complexity of truth, the strength found in darkness, and the transformation that comes from survival. Join our community of readers who believe in the power of storytelling to inspire change and understanding.